Happy huntings, horror fans, and welcome to this week's episode of Megan's Murder Movies. I'm your host, Megan, and I'm super pumped to get into today's episode. It's probably going to be a really long one, and today's kind of a two-parter. Today we're going to be starting with Stephen King's adaptation of It that was recently released a couple of years ago. So today we're going to do It Chapter 1, and then next week we will do It Chapter 2. These are probably pretty heavily played in my rotation. Probably not as heavy as Scream or Silence of the Lambs, but I do watch them very often, and I think I saw each of them in theaters at least 3 times because I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I just love these movies so much. They hold a very special place in my heart. So we've got a lot to talk about, so let's jump into a summary. So 7 young outcasts in Derry, Maine are forced to face their worst nightmare, an ancient shape-shifting evil that emerges from the sewer every 27 years to prey on the town's children. Banding together over the course of one horrifying summer, these friends must overcome their own personal fears to battle the murderous, bloodthirsty clown known as Pennywise. Now that we've got a summary, we can jump into a cast. So Jaden Martell plays Bill Denbrough. Jaden's an American actor. Obviously, he plays in It Chapter 1, and then he's also in It Chapter 2 when they do the flashbacks. He also appeared in Knives Out in 2019 and starred in the miniseries Defending Jacob in 2020. We'll move on to Bill Skarsgård, who plays Pennywise. Skarsgård is a Swedish actor best known for portraying Pennywise in the It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2 films. He also had a voice role in Eternals. Skarsgård has also appeared in the comedy Simple Simon. He was in the Divergent series Allegiant, Atomic Blonde. He was in the comedy horror Villains in 2019. He was in 9 Days, which came out in 2020. He starred in the supernatural horror series Hemlock Grove, which ran from 2013 to 2015, and was in the anthology horror series Castle Rock, which is also based on Stephen King work from 2018 to 2019. And then he plays the lead role in the Netflix series Clark. Then we'll go on to Jeremy Ray Taylor, who plays Ben Hanscom. Jeremy is an American actor known for playing Ben. That was his breakout role. He was also the role of Sonny Quinn in Goosebumps 2: Haunted Halloween. Then we'll move on to Sophia Lillis, who plays Beverly Marsh. Sophia is an American actress known for playing Beverly Marsh, and then she was also the starring role in the Netflix drama series I'm Not Okay With This, which came out in 2020 and didn't get renewed for a second season, and I'm so sad about it because it was such an interesting show. It was based on a graphic novel, which I've not read, but if you haven't seen I'm Not Okay With This, I would definitely recommend it, even though it does leave off on a cliffhanger, and because it wasn't renewed, we're not going to get any more, but I do want to check out the graphic novel because the show itself was really cool. And then Sophia has also appeared in the HBO psychological thriller miniseries Sharp Objects, which she portrays a younger version of Amy Adams' character. Then we'll move on to my personal favorite character, Richie Tozier, who is played by Finn Wolfhard. So Finn is a Canadian actor and musician. He portrays Mike Wheeler in the Netflix series Stranger Things. And then he also plays Richie in both It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. He was in the film The Goldfinch, which is also really good. He voiced Pugsley Addams in The Addams Family in 2019 and was Trevor in the supernatural film Ghostbusters Afterlife. And then he also made his directorial debut with a comedy short film, Night Shifts, in 2020. And then he was also the lead vocalist and guitarist for the rock band Calpurnia and is currently a member of the Aubreys. Next we'll move on to Wyatt Olaf, who plays Stan Uris, or Stanley Uris, or Stan. Most of the kids call him Stan. So Wyatt's an American actor known for playing the role of Stanley, and then he was also in the Netflix series I'm Not Okay With This alongside Sophia. He's also really good in that, and I'm really sad that they're not renewing that for a second season. Next we'll move on to Chosen Jacobs, who plays Mike Hanlon. Chosen's an American actor and singer, best known for his recurring role as Will Grover in the CBS television series Hawaii Five-0, and then also his role as Mike Hanlon in It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. Then we'll move on to Jack Dylan Grazer, who plays Eddie Kaspbrak. So Jack's an American actor and began his acting career playing guest roles in film and television, and then had his breakthrough role of Eddie Kaspbrak in the It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. He also starred in CBS's series Me, Myself, and I. He portrayed Freddie Freeman in the 2019 DC Extended Universe film Shazam, and will be returning for the sequel for that as well. He's also been in the television series We Are Who We Are, and he was in the film Don't Tell a Soul, both in 2020. He voiced Alberto in the 2021 Pixar film Luca, and voiced Barney in the 2021 20th Century Studios film Ron's Gone Wrong. And then in 2018, The Hollywood Reporter named him one of the top 30 stars under the age of 18. Then we'll move on to Nicholas Hamilton, who plays Henry Bowers. And so Nicholas is an Australian actor, musician, and singer, best known for portraying Raelian in Captain Fantastic, and then, of course, Henry Bowers in It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. Then we'll move on to a short appearance, but a very important appearance in the film, which is Georgie Denbrough, Bill's younger brother, played by Jackson Robert Scott. So Jackson's an American child actor known for playing Bodie Locke in the Netflix series Lock and Key, and Georgie Denbrough in the films It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. Then we'll talk about Owen Teague, who is introduced as Patrick Hockstetter. So Owen's an American actor. He's known for his roles in The Stand, Miss Fletcher, Inherit the Viper, To Leslie, Montana Story, The Cow, Bloodline. He was in the episode Archangel of the 4th season of Black Mirror. He also appears as Patrick Hockstetter in It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. And he's had key roles in the drama Every Day and the thriller I See You. And then the last person we're going to talk about is Javier Botet, who plays the hobo / the leper. So Javier's a Spanish actor, primarily cast in creature roles. He has portrayed tons of different horror icons. So he was the title character in Mama. He was set in The Mummy. He was Slender Man in the 2018 film. He's also been in Crimson Peak, The Conjuring 2, It, of course. And in 2019, he was in Insidious, The Last Key, and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So he is constantly playing, he's a very tall, kind of lanky, skeleton-looking guy. And so definitely uses that to his advantage when getting these, like, creature roles of playing these really startling characters. So now we will get into some fun facts, and then we'll talk a little bit about differences, like key differences that we see in the movie versus the book, which we'll also talk a little bit about in the scene-by-scene breakdown, but we'll kind of highlight those before we get into the scene-by-scene. So without further ado, let's jump into some fun facts. So it took about 3 hours every day to get Bill Skarsgård into the prosthetics, makeup, and costume for him to play Pennywise. It started when filming first took place and they were kind of testing everything. It would take about 5 hours, but then as they kind of got their rhythm and they got the hang of how everything was going to roll, they got it down to about 2.5 hours. So although the fictional town of Derry was inspired by Stephen King's hometown of Bangor, Maine, filming took place in the town called Port Hope in Canada. So then in the film we see this giant sewer entrance that the kids go into. This location was not real, and it was actually built into a practical location by the production team. So the leper's face was a practical pullover silicone mask with a removable eye that the performer could look into. So that is Javier's character. You'll get to see if you watch the film. It's really great. You could also look up just pictures of the leper at Chapter 1, and it'll come up. So the interior of the Neobalt house, which we will talk about, was shot in a real abandoned house. The 116-year-old mansion is called the Cranefield House and is located in Toronto. So I guess they had about 160 people audition for the role of Pennywise, and Bill Skarsgård beat out 159 people, so good for him. So Jaden Martell, who plays Bill, initially auditioned to play Eddie, which is very interesting because I feel like those roles are very different from one another, but I think Jaden does an amazing job playing Bill. So the shape-shifting character, also known as Pennywise, the real form is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. So a running theme within Lovecraft's work is the idea of monsters that are from another dimension and are incomprehensible to humankind. Another common theme is the idea of seeing something that's so horrifying that it kills the person who sees it or drives it insane. So the true form of it is very clearly like a Lovecraftian type of monster. So this is one of my favorite stories from kind of set that I've heard, and it was in an interview with Bill Skarsgård. And so he worked with Jack Dylan Grazer, who plays Eddie, first. He was one of the first kids that he worked with on set, so one of the first kids that saw him in the full getup with the makeup and everything, and Bill playing this very scary character. So during their first scene, Grazer started crying and was like gagging, and Skarsgård was like in his face and yelling, and the teeth that he had was causing him to drool all over this kid. And Skarsgård, when they yelled cut, was like, I terrified, like I scarred this kid for the rest of his life. And so he's genuinely concerned. He's like, hey kid, like, are you okay? I'm so sorry. And I guess Jack looked at him and said, I love what you're doing with the character. Like, keep it up. You're doing amazing. And was totally just 100% acting as terrified as he was. And Skarsgård was like, oh my gosh, this kid is so professional and ridiculous, and he was so worried that he like traumatized this kid for the rest of his life. And then he's like, I love what you're doing with the character, man, like keep it up, you're doing amazing. And you just imagine him just standing like in the clown costume being very confused, looking around like, now I'm not sure what's happening. So then another Pennywise fun fact is that he only has about 4 minutes of dialogue in the entire film. Like, he is the main bad guy, and he only talks for about 4 minutes, which I feel like is fair because he's got a lot of just like lurking around corner moments. But yeah, he, a 2.5 hour long film, and he's got 4 minutes of it. Another fact that I really like is that much of Richie and Eddie's banter was improv. So throughout the film, you see the two of them bicker back and forth a lot, kind of that idea of an old married couple. They're constantly bickering with one another and giving each other crap. And I guess a lot of that was improvised, which I thought was really cool. So It Chapter 1 grossed $123 million over its North American opening weekend, which was a total record for a horror film, more than double that of the previous record holder, Paranormal Activity 3, and also the second largest R rating opening ever, behind only Deadpool. So I guess two of the hardest scenes to shoot were the storm drain scene with Georgie and Pennywise, and then the flooded basement scene with Bill and Pennywise. So he said these were the most difficult because they both involved a lot of water and a lot of crucial timing elements, because you get the water wrong in one moment and it's going to throw off the whole thing. So I guess he said that those were the most difficult. So then I know that we talked about how Jaden initially auditioned for the role of Eddie, but I guess both Wyatt and Jack auditioned for the role of Bill, but they ended up getting, of course, their roles of Stan and Eddie, respectively. Which I think is kind of interesting and really cool that the casting directors were able to realize, like, hey, just because you're not good for this role, I think you're kind of perfect for that one. And so then I think this may be one of my favorite fun facts, because I'm just trying to patiently wait for this. But director Andy Muschietti stated that he intends to make a supercut version of this film combined with It Chapter 2 and uses like extra footage from both. And that will also follow the novel, because if you read the book, it jumps back and forth in time of like the future and then the past, whereas the film, it's here's what happened when they were children. And then in It Chapter 2, it's here's what happens when they're adults, with a couple little flashback scenes. But I really want to see it all kind of in the format that's similar to the novel, with all of the extra stuff added. But then it's probably going to be like 5 hours. But I'm also totally fine with that. I just love all of these characters so much. I love the book and would love to see kind of all the extra stuff that we didn't get to, along with it being cut in a different way. So then the last fun fact that I have is that the movie takes place in 1989, which is the same year that the miniseries was filmed. So this doesn't follow the book timeline, but it just to make it a little bit more present times, because when they do the 27-year jump, it makes a little bit more sense, which is kind of our first book to movie difference that we'll talk about. So the story setting was updated to the 1980s. So the Stephen King's It narrative is split between two time periods, 1957 to 1958, and then 1984 to 1985. And so this just changes the time period. Andy did that, and like the writers did that, so that when they do it, it's from 1989 to 1990, and then they can do that jump to 2016, which, we get that more present day timeline, and things are a little bit easier than trying to find all of the stuff from those 50s and then 80s time period everything. They can kind of incorporate a little bit more modernism into it. So another big difference is that there is no sign of Maturin the turtle. So one of there's this whole scene or like part in the book where this ancient turtle comes to talk to Bill, and he's a very important character in the mythos of the Stephen King universe, which isn't in the book. They reference a turtle a couple of times, but it's not like the turtle. So in the book, Maturin informs young Bill Denbrough on how to defeat Pennywise, which is actually the turtle's sworn nemesis. So you do that with the Ritual of Chud, which we will talk more about in the second part, It Chapter 2, because that's when they do the Ritual of Chud. But in the movie, they only mention turtles a few times. They talk about turtles when the kids are at the quarry swimming, and then as well as a Lego model turtle in Georgie's room. So the next difference between the book and the movie is that it, or Pennywise's, transformations have changed. So with kind of the change in era comes a change in choices for Pennywise's shape-shifting. A couple differences. In the book, Ben sees a monster that kind of recalls Boris Karloff's The Mummy, because he mentions that that was scary for him. But in the movie, Ben sees a monstrous apparition based off a victim of the Derry Ironworks explosion after he's doing some history of the town. And then another difference is that Richie doesn't see a werewolf. In the book, he goes to see the movie I Was a Teenage Werewolf and then gets chased out of the movie theater by a transformation of a werewolf. But in the movie, he's tormented with a room full of clown paraphernalia because that's what Richie says that he's scared of. In the book, Stan is haunted by two kids who died in the standpipe, but he, in the movie, is tormented by this really creepy painting that's in his dad's office. And then the last one we'll talk about is Mike, who in the book gets attacked by this like giant bird, and then in the movie, he's reminded of the death of his parents who burned to death. So it's very interesting, kind of the little choices that they chose to make. I don't think it really changes the movie or the idea that much. I do wish that they rewrote Mike's character a teensy bit different, but I get what they did. So kind of based on that, Mike's character had kind of the biggest rewrite, I guess you could say. So in the book, he had both of his parents, but his father ended up dying of cancer, and his father tells him about the fire that happened at the Black Spot nightclub, which we learn is an African-American nightclub, was burnt down by a bunch of white supremacists. You know, they came in the evening, they locked the doors from the outside and burned it to the ground, which is completely terrible. In the movie, we get the fire sense from what happened with Mike's parents. So he says that they were all in the house and a fire broke out. His parents were trying to get to him, and he was kind of stuck in a room. He was really young, so, you know, he wasn't at that point where he could, like, go open the door or, like, help them. But he has these kind of flashbacks of them pounding on the door, trying to get to him and save them as they're burning, which is just very tragic and terrible. So another small change is that at the end of the movie, Bill cuts the palms of the Losers Club when they make the oath that they'll come back and defeat Pennywise in 27 years if they need to. In the book, this event was actually Stan, which is kind of a bummer that I feel like a big role of his was reduced, but I also understand why they did it, because I don't know if I want to talk about that. We'll talk about it in the next one. If you know the story, you know what happens to Stan, but our boy Stan doesn't make it, which is really sad. So I get why they had Bill take over the idea of making everyone promise to come back because of what happens to Stan, but that was Stan's role in the book. So there's some big variances in the aftermath of Georgie's death between the book and the movie. So in the movie, a local neighbor doesn't see or hear the incident. They only see Georgie talking to the storm drain and then blood left after he's been eaten. So this in turn leads Bill to think that Georgie might still be alive in the sewers somewhere, or somewhere else in town alive. And in the book, it's a little bit different. Georgie's body is not only found and recovered, but the murder itself is noticed by someone gardening on the stormy day in question. You know, they were kind of out doing stuff in their yard and seeing everything happening, but they just kind of act like, then the whole town acts like nothing happened, which I think is sad. I think that for the trauma that Bill goes through, though, I hate saying that I like the fact that we don't know for sure that Georgie died, but I think it was an interesting play based on how Bill's character is and how Jaden played him. I think it was really cool to see the emotion from that character of, you know, just his torment of having to go home every day not knowing exactly what happened to his brother. And he talks about that in the film, which I think is really interesting. So then the last thing that we'll talk about, well, we have two more kind of big book movie differences that we'll talk about. So the next one is that Bev's mom is nowhere around in chapter 1 in the film. There's a good portion of its story that details how Beverly's mother works hard for her family while at the same time worrying her husband is sexually assaulting their daughter behind her back. So this is a kind of a running theme in the book. But she, like Mike Hanlon's dad, dies of cancer in the novel's text. She's not even present in the film version of it. We, as the audience, are just kind of left to infer that her dad is a single parent and is harming his daughter through his actions and body language in the movie, which I feel like they don't hint at it lightly that he's being inappropriate with his daughter and being just awful. Yeah, it's definitely heavily implied. I won't even say hinted, it's just heavily implied. So then the last thing we'll talk about is that Henry Bauer's dad in the movie is a police officer, whereas in the book, Henry's dad is a farmer and he's a racist and just not a great guy. I feel like it's really easy to kind of infer that he's still a racist in this one. He's still not a good guy because Henry is a terrible person, and you see these themes of racism come up with Henry as well, and it's like, you don't just, you're not just like that, like that's something that's put into you and ingrained into you as you're growing up, so the likelihood that his dad is still racist in this one, I'm gonna say is 100%, because where else would Henry have learned that? So I think that those are all of the, like, book to movie differences. I'm going to go let my dog out, and then we will jump into a scene-by-scene breakdown. So now we can jump into the scene-by-scene breakdown. I want to talk really quickly about the opening credits. So we get this really great audio when the film starts of children singing. It sounds really creepy. We also hear rain. This is kind of as the Warner Brothers logo and the other production companies do their little bit of advertising. And I think it sets the mood of the film perfectly in that, like, 30 seconds. So continuing with the rain, we open on a rainy day in Derry, Maine. We see the exterior of a house, and inside we see a young boy building a paper boat. Next we see a bedroom with two young boys, presumably brothers. The older brother is Bill, and he is building the boat, and his younger brother Georgie's asking him to play with him. Bill is in bed and says he would play with him, but he's still really sick. He jokes that he's dying, and Georgie gets a bit worried and upset, and he's like, no, like, you're not dying, you're gonna be fine, and Bill kind of chuckles, and we notice that Bill has a little bit of a stutter. Bill has Georgie go into the basement of their house for glue so that they can seal the boat. Their mother's downstairs playing the piano, and Georgie's really scared of going into the basement. He slowly goes down the stairs, and it's pitch black, and I'm like, why, like, are there no lights? Like, if the power's out because of the storm, like, where's a flashlight or a candle or something? But it's pitch black, and we hear Bill talking to him via a walkie-talkie. So Georgie's got, like, a walkie-talkie in his hand, and Bill's like, hurry up, like, I need you to get the glue. Georgie walks down, grabs the glue, and turns to run back after he thinks he sees eyes staring at him, but he decides to look with his flashlight, and there's nothing there. But then thunder strikes, and Georgie runs out of the basement, which I feel like is valid. Bill seals up the boat and gives it to Georgie. Bill makes the comment, she's all ready, and he explains to Georgie that you give boats female pronouns, so you call boats she. The brothers hug, and Georgie goes off to play outside. Bill watches him leave from the window and uses the walkie-talkie to tell him to be careful. Georgie's in a little yellow raincoat. He puts the boat in the water along the street, kind of in, like, the drain area, and watches it flow. He chases after it, and he's laughing, and he accidentally runs into this, like, sign and falls down, which gives the boat time to get ahead of him, and Georgie loses the boat in the sewer drain at the intersection of Jackson and Witcham Street. He's really sad, and he's worried that Bill's going to be mad at him. He's looking in the dark drain, and then these two eyes pop up, and we hear this growling sound. Georgie gets scared, and this is when we first see Pennywise. Pennywise says, "Hiya, Georgie." And we see him come into the light just a little bit. He tells him he has a nice boat and asks if he wants it back. He's trying to make conversation, and he asks about his friends and his brother. And Georgie's like, "Yeah, I have some friends, but like my brother's my bestest friend." And Pennywise is like, "Oh my gosh, do you want a balloon?" And Georgie's like, "Well, I'm not supposed to take stuff from strangers." And Pennywise goes, "Well, you're Georgie, and I'm Pennywise. Now we're not strangers. Easy peasy." And this is when we see a neighbor come outside, and she sees Georgie looking into the drain, but she kind of just walks away. She's like, kids, whatever. Georgie asks Pennywise why he's down there, and Pennywise says that the storm blew him away, blew the whole circus away. He asks Georgie if he smells the popcorn, and they laugh a little bit. You know, Pennywise is being silly. He's like, "Do you smell the popcorn?" Like, pop, 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 pop. And they're like, "Ha, ha, ha, adorable." No, not adorable. Pennywise then starts drooling, and he gets a little bit creepy again. And Georgie goes, "Yeah, so I think I'm gonna go." And Pennywise is like, "Well, like without your boat? Bill's gonna kill you." He tells Georgie to take it, and as Georgie goes to reach into the drain for it, Pennywise grabs his arm and bites it off. Georgie tries to get away, but Pennywise pulls him into the sewer, and the last thing we hear from Georgie is him calling for his brother. The neighbor's now back on her porch and sees blood mixed with rain where Georgie was kneeling. Next, we're in a dark tunnel, and we hear children singing again, and we come out over a river with blue sky. It's now June 1989. Then we move to a sheep farm, and a young boy is supposed to slaughter one of the sheep with his bolt gun. He hesitates too long, and his grandfather does it for him. We learn that this character is Mike. His grandfather explains to Mike that there are two places you can be. Out here like us, or in there like them. They have this whole conversation about, you have to make tough choices and all this kind of stuff. And after that conversation's over, we jump to the school. We meet Stan, Richie, and Eddie, who are walking with Bill. They're discussing Stan's upcoming bar mitzvah and making jokes and laughing. They're like, what's exactly is going to happen? And Richie's like, "I think that the rabbi's going to pull down your pants and yell, 'Where's the beef?'" And Stan explains to them, what's actually going to happen. He's going to read from the Torah, he's going to become a man, all of that fun stuff. They walk past the school bullies, which include Henry Bowers and Patrick Hockstetter and his friends. And this transition is really nice into meeting Greta, another bully, as she's bullying Beverly. So the boys, we see the bullies in the back, the older boys. Richie and Stan and Bill and Eddie walk past them, and they also walk past this girl, and she's walking the opposite way into the girls' bathroom. Her name is Greta, and she's bullying Beverly. Greta and her friends are picking on her while Bev is smoking a cigarette in the bathroom stall, and we learn that Beverly has a reputation for being a slut. However, we find out later that this is all a lie. Greta and her friends fill up a half-full trash bag with water and dump it on Bev. She uses her backpack as an umbrella and saves herself a bit from the trash shower, but still a pretty terrible thing to do. Outside the school, there's a sign about the town having a 7 p.m. curfew. The boys, Stan, Richie, Eddie, and Bill, are outside throwing away everything in their school bags as it's now officially summer vacation. They're all excited and talking about what they want to do for the summer. Richie's like, "Tomorrow I start my training. I'm gonna play Street Fighter." And Eddie's like, "You really want to spend your entire summer inside of an arcade?" And Richie goes, "It beats spending it inside of your mom." Richie is, in the book, he's known as Trash Mouth because he just is, has the worst jokes. And in the book, they constantly tell him beep beep Richie when he's being too much, which basically his friend's way of telling him to shut up. So yeah, Richie Tozier Trashmouth is my absolute favorite, and I will probably say a lot of his lines in this because they're just great. So Richie, like I said, wants to play Street Fighter, and Bill mentions that they all agreed to help him go to the Barrens to look for Georgie. They all get a little bit quiet, and they go, "Oh yeah, of course, we did agree to that. So that's what we're gonna do." Next, they look over, and there's this woman outside the school with a couple of police officers. She's watching the kids come outside, and she looks tired and scared and worried. And we learn that another child in town has gone missing. Betty Ripsom. The boys talk about it, and Bill's like, she's not dead, she's just missing. He doesn't want to admit that it's been a while since Georgie's been gone. The likelihood he's going to come back okay is very slim, but he's in denial, and that's okay. he's like, she's not dead, she's just missing. And the boys are like, oh yeah, just missing, like she's just missing. As the boys go to leave, they encounter Henry Bowers and the other bullies. Richie's knocked into Stan and they both fall down. Patrick takes Stan's yarmulke and throws it into the passing school bus. Eddie's face is burped into, causing him to almost vomit. And they don't bother Bill, though, until he mouths off to Bowers. He tells Bowers that he says, "You suck, Bowers." And Henry gets in his face and tells him that he gave him a pass because of his brother, but now he's fair game. As he gets in Billy's face, one of the police officers catches them, and Henry backs down, and the older boys leave. We later learn that this man who was looking at Henry is his father. At the back of the school, we meet Ben. He's getting his bike and also carrying this large model that he must have made for class. He's struggling a bit, and Bevs comes out and asks him to move. He gets all flustered and drops his bike and drops the model, and Bev's like, Henry's around front, like, you don't have to worry. And they talk a little bit, and we learn that Henry hates Ben, and Bev listens to Ben's music, and he's listening to New Kids on the Block. They joke and talk a little bit about that, and you can tell that Ben really has a crush on her. She offers to sign his yearbook, and when she does, she opens it and realizes that no one else signed his yearbook. He asked nobody to do it, or nobody offered, or whatever the case, but she signs it. She leaves, and he starts making his way home. Bill's walking his bike home and saying a line that we learn in the book is from his speech therapy. So the line is, he thrusts his fist against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. So this line is brought up a couple of times in part 1 for sure, and I think they mention it in part 2, but they don't mention like why it's there, where it's coming from. But in the book we learned that this is Bill's speech therapist gave him this to practice working on his stutter. So Bill goes into the garage where his dad is working, and they have a little argument. Bill's been doing research about where Georgie could have ended up. He's got all of these like tubes set up from his hamster, and it's set up in the layout of the sewer. And so he takes the hose and like puts, like a action figure in it and puts water in it, and he's like, the action figure goes to the box labeled the Barrens every single time. And his dad's like, you need to get over it. Like, Georgie's gone. We can't keep doing this. We have to move on. We can't do this anymore. And you can tell that this really upsets Bill because he just wants his brother back. And I think that that's fair. So Bill's holding back tears, and this poor family must just be going through this awful grief that even in the 80s, grief counseling and therapy is not super immediate nowadays. I can't imagine back in the 80s or when the book was written, like time period of the 50s, seeing a grief counselor was not something that was a thing. Next we see Mike riding his bike into town to take meat from his grandfather's farm to the butcher to sell. Mike is also harassed by Henry and his goons. Only the motive here, like I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, is racial. Mike pulls into the alley next to the butcher, and he has this vision of people being trapped in the butcher's, unable to get out, much like the fire that his parents went through. And we also see smoke coming out of it. The door opens, and we see way in the background Pennywise. It's really hard to tell at first, like, what's exactly happening, and then his eyes start glowing red. Mike looks terrified, and as he's watching Pennywise, Henry and his goons speed down the alleyway at him, almost run him over, and Henry tells him to stay the fuck out of his town. The butcher comes out to check on Mike after they drive away. Then we're at the temple with Stan. He's practicing for his bar mitzvah. His father is the rabbi and is upset that Stan is struggling so much. He's like, you've not even been practicing. Like, go take the book back up to my office and we'll try again later. And so he goes up, and there's this painting of this woman with a flute. But the painting is really creepy, and I'm like, I don't understand why you'd have that in your office anyway. Like, I like weird art, but this one it's a little creepy. So the painting's all crooked on the wall, and Stan doesn't want to look at it, but he gets brave, and he goes and he straightens the painting out. And this shot is so great because we see Stan go fix the painting from the woman's eyes in the painting. It's so amazing. So it's like him all crooked, and then as he fixes the painting, the camera becomes straight on again. It's awesome. So then he continues to the bookshelf, puts the Torah back, and as he's putting the Torah back, we hear the painting fall off the wall behind him. As he approaches it and puts it back up on the wall, the canvas is empty. We then start hearing a flute playing from behind Stan, and he's almost attacked by this woman in the painting. Next, we are with Richie, Eddie, and Bill at Eddie's house getting supplies before they head over to the Barrens. They're getting snacks, and Richie and Eddie are bickering. Richie kind of goes over to the medicine cabinet. He's like, is this your birth control? And Eddie's like, yeah, I'm saving them for your sister. And they go to leave, and we get to meet Eddie's mom. She's very awkward, and she treats Eddie like a baby. And I know these kids are like 12, 13, maybe. You know, like they're still kids, but she treats him like he's 4, maybe, you know? And she's watching, like we can see on the TV, she's watching this like kids show that you can only see a little bit of on the side. And she's like, you know, stay out of the grass, you know you're allergic, like, do you have all your meds? And he's like, yes, I have all my meds. And so then he goes and he gives her a kiss before they leave, and he's like, goodbye, I love you, because she, like, that's kind of just what she was wanting. And then Richie's like, do you want one for me too, Mrs. K? And Eddie's like, get, like, go, and, like, pushes the boys out the front door. Then we get to see a little aerial view of the town while they ride their bikes through it. Ben is at the library and sees the boys on their bikes off to hang out, and Ben is writing a poem to Beverly on this little postcard. The librarian brings him this big book on the Dairytown history. He's looking over the book and learns of this Easter egg hunt at the Dairy Iron Works that took place in 1908 that ended with an explosion and 88 children died. While in the library, Ben is led into the basement as he follows this red balloon. So he kind of like sees this balloon floating, and he follows it down the stairs into the basement, and then he starts seeing these little Easter eggs. So he picks one up to look at it, and then he hears someone coming down the stairs after him. And so we see this headless body come down the stairs with Easter eggs in its hands. And when he was looking through the book, he saw that one of the children was decapitated by the explosion. Ben runs from this headless child with all of these Easter eggs, and the child slowly turns into Pennywise. And so Ben is now running from Pennywise in the basement of this library. He accidentally runs into the librarian, and she's like, what are you doing down here? Like, what is happening? And he just leaves the library after that, but sadly runs right into Henry Bowers, who was waiting for him outside. Henry and his friends drag Ben to this covered bridge, and Henry is planning to carve his name into Ben's stomach with his hunting knife. This car drives by, and Ben is trying to get the people to notice him and help him, but they look over and they look forward and just keep driving, and then we see a red balloon pop up in the back of the car. It's very interesting because in the book, you know, it kind of talks about how when Pennywise is active, or when it is active, the town has a shift. All of the adults in the town just kind of seem to not know what's happening or not be paying attention enough to what's going on, which I think is really interesting. And it also, when it is active, people are just a lot angrier and all of this crazy stuff happens. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that happen during these moments when it is active. So Ben is able to get away by kicking off of Henry and tumbling backwards down this hill. Henry and his friends go after him, but Ben is able to get away, and we see him running along the river. Next, we're back with Eddie, Richie, and Bill, and they're now joined by Stan. Richie and Bill are the only two who go into the giant sewer pipe. Richie and Eddie are having more banter, and, you know, Richie's kind of like, well, come on, guys, and Stan and Eddie are like, absolutely not, and Eddie's like, well, that's gray water, like, it's just shit and piss, and I'm not gonna get a staph infection, and Richie's like, well, I'll show you a staph infection, and so they're just bantering back and forth, and then they find a sneaker that belonged to Betty Ripsom. And poor Bill is really just wanting to find Georgie. He's trying to stay positive, but they find this shoe, and it's just bad news. You know, like, it's just got to be a bad sign. They try to search a little bit more, but Ben shows up behind them. He's bleeding, he's exhausted, he's covered in water, and we see Patrick show up where the boys were all at, kind of at the sewer pipe. He shows up what seems like pretty shortly after Ben does, but the boys are long gone. He goes into the sewer pipe because he thinks he hears Ben, and so he goes to follow him in there and kind of get him that way, but Patrick is attacked by Betty Ripsom's dead body, which then turns into Pennywise, and Patrick Hockstetter is the next victim of Pennywise that we see, which is very different than his death in the book. I wish that we would have got his death in the book because it's very intense. In the book, Patrick Hockstetter kills animals, and in the woods has this, like, refrigerator that's close to where the junkyard is. And so he kind of keeps his dead animal collection in the refrigerator. So one day, Bev is in the woods hiding from them because she's trying to get home, and she sees Patrick open the fridge, and he's attacked by leeches. And these leeches suck so much blood out of him that then the leeches start exploding. And it's just such a graphic, like, gruesome, bloody death that I wish we could have seen, because I think it would have been so interesting to see how that gets shot and, you know, how they could have done that, whether it's CGI or whatever. But yeah, he definitely, I feel like, got an easier death in the movie than he does in the book, for sure. So we see the boys help Ben get away from Henry and his gang. They take him into town, and they stop in the alley next to the pharmacy so they can fix up his wounds. Richie and Ben stay outside while Stan, Bill, and Eddie go into the pharmacy for supplies. And Richie looks at Ben and he goes, "I'm glad I got to meet you before you died." And Ben just looks at him with this, like, what the fuck look on his face. I just love Richie so much. Bev is also in the store looking at the large array of period products. Eddie collects what they need, but they have no money. They talk with Bev, and she's like, "I'll distract the pharmacy owner so that you guys can take what you need and get out of here." She goes up to the counter. She asks the owner to try on his glasses, and he's really creepy with her. She's like, "You look just like Clark Kent." And he's like, "Oh, no, I don't." Like, ha ha ha. And she's like, "Can I try on your glasses?" And then she's like, "What do you think?" And he's like, "You look just like Lois Lane." And it's like, okay, this girl's like 12 or 13. Like, she's already got one creepy man in her life who we haven't met yet, but like, we don't need the pharmacist being creepy as well. But she knocks over a little stand, and the pharmacist has to, like, bend over and pick everything up, and at that point, the boys get to take what they need and head out. And Bev heads out once she gets her things that she needed, and we also see a very interesting mural of the Bradley Gang incident, which was likely inspired by the real-life Bradley Gang shooting that took place on April 27th in 1936 in Bangor, Maine. So in the book, basically, the Bradley Gang shows up in town. They would typically, like, rob places, and the people of Derry were like, "You're not doing this here." And so there's a big shootout between the townspeople and the Bradley Gang. And a lot of people in the book, they talk about how a lot of witnesses at that incident talk about seeing a clown, you know, kind of in the midst of the shootout. So Bev chats with Bill outside the store, and he thanks her for her help. He clearly has a crush on her as well, and she hears Ben in the alley and goes to check out what's going on. Ben gets all embarrassed, and she's like, "Did they get the right stuff to fix you up?" and kind of gives him a little wink, and his face gets all flush. It's cute. Bill invites her to the quarry the next day, and after she leaves, the boys chat about her, and there's a rumor that she and Henry had sex, which Bill is like, "Nope, it's just a rumor. Like, that's, you know, that couldn't have happened." Richie's being really gross, and he's like, "Yeah, I hear that, you know, like, she slept with a lot of guys. I hear the list is longer than my wing." And Stan goes, "Well, that's not saying much." And Bill's like, "You know, no, it's just a rumor. Like, I don't think she's like that," which is, you know, really nice, and I think sad that there's all of these poor rumors going around about this poor girl. So Eddie's working on cleaning Ben's wounds and patching him up. And when Bev gets home, we get to meet her creepy father for the first time. The TV is on to the same show that Eddie's mom was watching, and Bev's dad comes up, and he's like, "Oh, how are you?" And he seems normal at first, and then when he realizes that she brought period products, he seems kind of upset, and he's like, "Well, are you still my little girl?" And she says yes, and he, like, touches her hair and smells it, and it's really weird, and you can tell she's very uncomfortable. I hate all of it. And we see Bev in the bathroom crying as she cuts her long, probably, I would say it's like shoulder blade or like mid-back length, beautiful red hair into like chin length bob, which I still think is beautiful. But again, that's pretty common for children who are experiencing sexual abuse, typically girls, is that they will cut off their hair because they think that will make them less appealing to the person who's abusing them, which I think is just awful. So the next day we see Eddie, Richie, Stan, Bill, and Ben at the quarry. They're in their tighty-whities trying to decide who's going to jump in the water first. While they're arguing, Bev pulls up on her bike, takes off her dress, and jumps into the water. And as she's running past them, she's like a bunch of sissies. The boys are shocked, and then we see a cute little montage of them playing in the water. Next, they're out of the water drying off, and Bev is sunbathing on a beach towel, and all the guys are kind of staring at her, and it's like, come on, guys, like, knock it off. Richie looks into Ben's bag and sees all this history stuff that he has. They mention the black spot being burnt down. They tell that little story. Bill goes to tell Bev that he likes her hair, but he can't get it out due to his stutter, so Ben jumps in and kind of steals the thunder from that compliment. Ben then tells them that Derry has had some terrible things happen in its past, and many more people die or go missing, actually 6 times more than the national average. And Ben says that he has more information at his house, and they all decide to go there. Someone outside of Ben's house is putting up a missing poster of Patrick, and the kids are in Ben's room, and he's telling them more about the town. He's got some papers on his wall, like he's solving a crime. Like, his wall's just covered in all these different papers and, like, articles, like, you know, like, there's gonna be strings everywhere, like he's trying to solve a crime. He says that Derry started as a beaver trapping town, but in the winter of the same year the town was started, everyone went missing. Like, no trace of the founders, no trace of anything. Total Roanoke style, which I think is really interesting. There's a bunch of rumors about what may have happened, but the only clues that were found were bloody clothes leading to the well house. But nobody knows for sure where exactly the well house is. Next, we see Eddie walking home on Neobold Street. His alarm goes off to take his meds, and he's in front of the Neobold abandoned house. It calls to him, and he walks a bit quicker, but as he's trying to get that done, he accidentally drops his pills, and as he's picking everything up, a leper shows up all rotted and gross and asks Eddie if the pills will help him. It chases Eddie toward the house, but Eddie tries to escape through the backyard instead of going in, which I think is totally valid. He's like, I'll just cut through the yard away from this creepy person. And next we see Pennywise waiting for Eddie. He tells Eddie to join him and that we all float down here. Eddie's able to get away, and we see Bev get home, and she finds the poem in her bag. She gets so happy, and she just feels so, like, full of joy. And the poem reads, "Your hair is winter fire, January embers, my heart burns there too." She reads this in the bathroom, and while she's in there, she hears someone calling her name from the drain of her sink. Someone is asking her for help and telling her again that we all float down here. Bev goes and gets a tape measure and puts it in the drain, and finally, when it won't go anymore, she pulls it back out, but something is on it, and it looks like bloody hair. This bloody hair then grabs Bev by the wrist, and then once it has her, like, locked to the sink, it grabs her by the back of the neck and is pulling her closer and closer to the drain, and then blood just starts shooting out of the drain toward Beverly. Like, the whole bathroom is covered in blood, and Bev's crying, and her dad comes in and is like, "What is wrong with you? Like, why are you screaming?" And she's like, "The sink, like, the blood." And he's like, "What are you talking about? Like, what blood? What sink?" And she's covered in blood, the whole room is covered in blood, and he walks up to her and he's like, "I'm worried about you. Like, what's going on? Like, are you okay?" And then he goes, "Why did you cut your hair? It makes you look like a boy." And then he just gets up and leaves. It's like, what the heck? So poor Bev is left on her bathroom floor covered in blood, looking terrified, and we see Bill wake up in the middle of the night. He goes into Georgie's room because the door's open and the light's on, and it's all just how Georgie would have left it. Bill gets really sad and starts crying, and then he hears something coming from downstairs. And then out of the corner of his eye, he sees what he thinks is Georgie going into the basement. So he goes down there, and he does see Georgie. But Georgie is being puppeted by Pennywise, so it's not really Georgie. Georgie is saying that it's all Bill's fault that this happened, and poor Bill is just heartbroken and crying, and he's like, "No, like, I miss you, and I want you home more than anything." And then Georgie starts getting really creepy. So first Georgie's really sad, and he's like, "Why did you let this happen to me?" and all this stuff. And then he's like, "You'll float too, you'll float too, you'll float too." And then we see his face is all kind of rotted, and yeah, it definitely doesn't look good. And then Pennywise attacks Bill, but he's able to run away in just enough time. And that's the thing with Pennywise, is a lot of people think that, oh, like, he doesn't, he had all these opportunities to get these kids at any time, and it's like, but he wants to build the fear level up. I think they probably maybe don't taste as good if they're not scared, you know what I mean? Or, like, he doesn't get as much power from them if they're not scared. The next day, the boys show up at Bev's, and she runs down to get them. She had invited them over. They keep Richie outside as the lookout in case her dad comes back, because they don't want to get her in trouble, and the others go inside to see the bathroom. They all can see the blood, which is good for her, because she felt like she might be going crazy. They help her clean it up, and we get a cute little montage of that. Bev chats with Bill, and she thinks that he wrote the poem. She references it to him, and he's got no clue what's going on. He's like, yeah, I don't really read poetry. Like, I'm not really sure. Ben is sad because he feels like he won't have a chance with her because she kind of just has eyes for Bill. Bev tells Bill that the rumors aren't true, and after they're all done cleaning and back on their bikes hanging out, Richie's upset that they took so long, and Bill tells them about the things that he's been seeing. They all open up a little bit about what they've been seeing. Can only virgins see this stuff? Is that why I'm not seeing this shit? He's, again, trying to make a joke of everything. And while the kids are discussing this in the middle of the street, they see Henry's friend's car and Mike's bicycle. And they're like, we have to go help Mike because we know that Henry is not. But they don't know his name's Mike yet. They know him as the homeschool kid. They're like, that's the homeschool kid's bike. Like, we should go help him out. So they go help Mike, and he's down by the river getting attacked by Henry. And Pennywise is kind of there in the distance, and Mike clocks him, and they kind of make eye contact. And Pennywise, like, holds up this arm that he's eating and, like, waves it at Mike like he's waving to him. It's very interesting. Pennywise is an interesting character. But he's basically just haunting him. And Henry is literally gonna kill Mike. He, like, picks up this giant rock and is just gonna smash it in Mike's face. Henry is terrifying. But Bev throws a rock at him, and it hits him square in the face. Mike is able to get away and comes across the river to the rest of the kids, and Henry says gross stuff about Beverly. He's like, you know, you guys don't have to try so hard. She'll do you if you just ask nicely. And Ben gets really mad and throws another rock at him. And then Richie has this great line where he goes, "Rock Wars!" And then he's hit in the head with a rock. And there's some really good comedic timing in what should be a very terrifying, scary movie. It's great. So they have this rock war, and Henry's friends decide to run off when it looks like they're going to lose the fight. And Richie looks at Henry and says, "Why don't you go blow your dad, you mullet-wearing asshole?" And then flips him off as he's walking away, which is one of my favorite lines. Next, they're all hanging out with Mike, and he's like, you guys didn't have to do that. Like, that's going to put a target on your backs with Henry. They're all kind of like, well, Henry doesn't like us either, so, you know, it really didn't make anything that worse for us coming to help you. And Richie has the famous line, "Welcome to the Losers Club." So the next, the kids are at the 4th of July parade, and they're talking about kind of all of the things that they've been experiencing. Ben said that he's kind of been tracking when these events happen, and that they only happen every 27 years. They're sitting at the park, and Mike says that his grandfather thinks that the town is cursed. Stan says that the things aren't real, and, you know, that if they just try to remember that they're not real, then it'll be okay. Richie admits that he's afraid of clowns. Mike tells them about his parents and their house burning down, and the conversation moves to Bill's garage, and they kind of go over what they know, and they think that the well house is actually in the house on Neobolt Street. They think that's where it lives, and Eddie kind of starts having an asthma attack. So while they're doing this, Bill has a slideshow, or like a little slide picture of the map of the sewers, and then he puts up, or like his dad's map of the sewers is on the wall, and then he puts up kind of a map of Deary on top of that with the slideshow like bit. So that's how they kind of track that they think the well house is actually on Neobolt Street. So then instead of like the slideshow playing, or like not the slideshow, instead of just the slide of Deary being the one projected, a family slideshow starts playing, and we see pictures of Georgie, and Pennywise shows up and scares all of them. It's actually a really good scare, in my opinion. It kind of like it's Bill's mom's hair is kind of in her face, and then as the slideshow is moving, it turns to Pennywise, and then he's just looking at them like through the picture, but then a bigger version of Pennywise like pops out of the projector screen. It's really interesting, and he takes up like the entire garage. It's great. So they open that garage door to let light in, and he disappears. Bill is like, okay, so we know where it is. Let's just go kill it. Let's go to the well house. And everyone's like, no, we were just attacked. Like, we don't want to do this. It's summer. Like, I'm done. But they follow Bill to Neobolt anyway. Bill gives this speech about Georgie going missing. And it's a really, really good speech because he basically says, like, since Georgie's been gone, my house is terrible. Like, we don't talk. It just feels gross and awful in my house. And so walking into this dilapidated, abandoned house where this creature lives is easier than walking into my own house now that Georgie's gone, because it's just It's not the same. It doesn't feel good. And Richie notices that during that speech, Bill didn't stutter once. So Bill, Richie, and Eddie go inside. They decide to have a couple of kids stay outside and keep watch in case something happens. They can go get police or whatever. So Bill, Richie, and Eddie are the three that kind of draw the short straw and have to go inside the house. And when they first go in, Richie finds a missing poster with his information on it. It's like the day's date that they're at the house, it's his age, it's his birth date, it's his picture, it's the shirt that he's wearing. And Bill assures him that he won't go missing, that they're going to stop this, that's why they're there, and that it's not real. It's just Pennywise messing with him. They hear someone call for them from upstairs, and they see Betty Ripsom on the floor, and then her body gets dragged away really quickly. Eddie is then separated from the other two after hearing someone call his name down the hallway. Eddie's locked in a room, and while he's trying to get away, the floor falls out, not below him, but the section of floor in front of him is gone. And he stops and he's waiting, but then the leper shows back up and goes to touch him. And as he turns around, Eddie faints and falls through basically the floor onto the kitchen table that's on the first floor. He breaks his arm during this fall. And then we jump back to Richie and Bill. Richie's also pulled away by a voice. This voice sounds like Eddie. And he gets trapped in this room with hundreds of clown puppets and statues and just a ton of clown paraphernalia. He also finds this puppet or doll of himself in this coffin, and this doll looks its face is kind of round. He kind of looks like a zombie. It's like a little zombie Richie doll. It's kind of interesting looking. But he closes it, and then Pennywise jumps out and goes, "Beep, beep, Richie." So Bill is able to open the door, and Richie's able to get out, but then they see this version of Eddie, all creepy and possessed, coming out of this mattress. And he's like, "You want to play loogie?" which is what they were playing at the quarry when they were going to jump in. And he just starts foaming at the mouth with this gray goo or whatever it is, and it kind of almost seems like it's toxic sludge or whatever, because as it's spreading on the floor, it's bubbling, it's hot or whatever. So downstairs, Eddie wakes up and notices that his arm is broken. In front of him, there's this refrigerator, and it opens up, and we get this amazing shot of Pennywise all contorted and twisted in the fridge, and he untwists and comes out, and then has to untwist his whole body. It's really cool. Definitely go watch the scene if you're not going to watch the movie. Just Pennywise refrigerator, and it should come up. They used a whole contortionist for this, and along with some CGI stuff, but it's really interesting. And then he does this weird little walk toward Eddie, he's totally just fucking with him. Pennywise is an asshole like that. So he stalks towards Eddie, and upstairs Bill and Richie are met with 3 doors in front of them. One says, "Not scary at all." The next one says, "Scary," and then the other one says, "Very scary." They pick the not scary door, and they see Betty Ripsom tied up in front of them, kind of in what would be a closet. She's her arms attached to the pole, but it's only her upper body. It's only her torso and up. She's got no legs, but you hear her say, "Where's my shoe?" because the reference to the shoe that they found in the sewers that were hers. And so they slam the door, and Richie goes, "Where the fuck were her feet? Why is she worried about her shoe?" We go back downstairs, and Pennywise is messing with Eddie and acting like he's gonna eat him. So he's got his arm in his hand, and he's putting his mouth closed, and then he pulls away like he was just joking. Pennywise is such a dick, but this is the scene that him and Jack shot, which was one of the first scenes that they shot together, or one of the first scenes that was shot, when Bill Skarsgård thought that he scared the crap out of him. Bill and Richie have to overcome their fear and not be scared. They're hyping themselves up downstairs. They're "No, it's fine. It's not real. We just have to open the door and it'll be fine." And so they open the next door, and it's totally fine. It's the regular hallway in front of them. It's not anything scary. And this causes Pennywise to react. Pennywise is "Why are you, how did you not, what's going on?" Because he feeds off of their fear. That's why he fucks with them so much. It's not that, he just thinks it's funny. They must give him more power, or they must be more tasty, the more scared that they are. So Bill and Richie go downstairs and find Pennywise over Eddie. Pennywise looks at Bill, and he's like, "Is this not real enough for you? Am I not real enough for you? It was real enough for Georgie," which, again, a dick move. Pennywise goes after Bill, and Bev comes in from the back door and just stabs him in the head with this metal pole. Pennywise gets really upset and slashes Ben's stomach and then leaves, like bowing as he goes. Bill follows him and sees that, like, he goes down into the basement, and yep, like, Pennywise is going down into the well, so they were right, this is the well house. Richie then tells Eddie that he's gonna snap his arm back in place, and Eddie's like, do not fucking touch me, and then Richie snaps his arm back into place. Eddie starts screaming. They get Eddie back home, and his mom yells at all of them. She doesn't believe what they say, and she even slut-shames Bev. She's like, I don't want a gross or, like, a nasty little girl like you touching my son. And it's like, okay, chill out, ma'am. So the losers walk away, and they kind of end up having a fight in the street. Bill wants to go back, and he's like, you know, we should go kill it. And Stan's like, no, I'm done. Like, did you see what just happened? And Bev's like, no, we need to go finish it. And Richie and Ben and Stan and Mike are all kind of done. Richie and Bill get into it, and he's like, no, you need to get over Georgie. He's gone, and the only thing that we're gonna do by continuing to go after this is all of us to get killed. And I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna get killed. And Bill gets upset, and he's like, you need to take it back. They get into a fight, and Bill ends up punching Richie. The rest of the team have to kind of hold Richie back because he's like, this is stupid. Like, you guys are going to get yourselves killed. I'm done. I'm out. And then Bev is like, no, this is what it wants. It wants to divide us because when we were all together, that's when we were able to hurt it. We need to stick together in order to kill it. But everyone except Bill and Bev leave. Mike is like, dude, I'm just the outsider and I need to keep it that way because I can't do this. Then we get a little montage of what everyone's doing kind of on their own. Stan has his bar mitzvah. Mike has found the courage to kind of kill the sheep, but he looks just very empty inside. Ben's back in the library. Seems like Bev and Bill are still kind of hanging out. Richie's playing Street Fighter, and poor Eddie has a broken arm. So next we're in August, and we are with Henry and his friends. They're kind of shooting bottles, and then Henry decides he wants to shoot a cat, but his dad shows up and is kind of like emotionally and I would say physically abusive to him because he shoots the gun at like Henry's feet. So like he didn't shoot him, but it's a no for me. Next we see Eddie at the pharmacy, and he has a cast on his arm. Greta, the bully who was bullying Bev, her father owns the pharmacy, so she's there hanging out. And she tells him that his meds are placebos, that they're bullshit. She signs his cast, and she's like trying to be all sweet. She's like, no, like it's okay, I'll sign it for you. And they're like holding eye contact, and then Eddie realizes that she's writing loser on his cast. Henry's outside of his house, and he gets something in the mail. There's a red balloon on his mailbox, and inside the mailbox, there's a box with a knife in it. He goes inside and he kills his father, stabbing him in the neck. And then we see that show that we've seen on Eddie's mom's television and Bev's dad's television of like these kids, and Pennywise is there, and they're telling Henry to kill them all. Bev is then attacked by her father when she goes to leave the house. He's like, I know that you're hanging out with those boys. And he grabs her hand and won't let go. He accuses her of messing around with them. And he found the poem that Ben wrote to her and wants to know why she hid it in her underwear drawer. He throws her around a little bit, and she kicks him in order to get away. He goes into the bathroom to look for her, and she knocks him out with, like, the lid to the toilet bowl. Just when we think that she's safe from this bad guy, she turns around in the bathroom and Pennywise is there just standing and just takes her. Bill and her were supposed to meet, and when she doesn't show up at the time they agreed upon, he goes to look for her. The front door to her apartment is open, and he finds her dad knocked out on the bathroom floor all bloody. And then when he like peeks in Bev's room, there is like blood on her wall that says, "You die if you try." And so he knows that Pennywise took her. Bill runs right to Richie and tells him about Bev. And at first, Richie kind of doesn't seem to understand because Bill comes up and he's like, "It took Bev." And Richie just kind of looks at him like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, It took her. And then it kind of like clicks for Richie of like what actually happened. Which goes back to the idea that we'll talk about a lot in the second one of if you're away from that stuff for long enough, you just kind of forget about it. Like Richie was kind of falling into the idea of the rest of the town of just not really noticing what's going on, which I think is really interesting. Next, they ring Eddie, and he goes to leave, and his mom's like, no, you're not going anywhere. And he's like, no, like, I know what my pills are. My pills are gazebos. They're bullshit. And it's such a great line, because it's like, no, they're placebos, not gazebos. That's different. But it's great. He yells at her, and he's like, you tried to keep me from my friends, but they're the only people who actually care about me, and so I'm going to help them. Next thing we see is that they're all on their way to Naples. Mike even brought the bolt gun that he uses at the farm. Eddie throws his fanny pack into kind of the overgrown yard, and Richie finds this bottle on the ground and, like, breaks it up against the railing of the porch to kind of, you know, make a weapon, but the bottle just totally shatters. There's, like, nothing usable from it, so he just kind of, like, throws it over his shoulder. And then we also see Henry outside the house as well, kind of on the next street, just watching and waiting. All the losers go in. The losers all go in really quickly except for Stan. He stays on the porch and they have to convince him to come. Once they do, they all go into the basement and rappel down the well. Bev wakes up and tries to find a way out. She looks up and sees all these kids floating in the air. She's in this, like, cistern area is what they call it. As she goes to run, Pennywise comes out and does this, like, dance, which is another pretty iconic scene. They did a lot of this one on the internet with, like, different music behind it, which was pretty funny. She tries to run, but he gets her, and his mouth opens up really big, and you see these lights. These lights are known as the Dead Lights, which we'll talk more about in It Chapter 2. Bev goes limp, but then starts floating in the air, just kind of hovering, almost like she's in a trance, like her body's in this trance. Mike is going last on the well, and he gets attacked by Henry Bowers. They fight, but Mike is able to push him down the well, and Henry took the gun from him and was going to shoot him in the head with it. Like, Henry just murdered his father, but, like, Henry's wild. So Mike's able to push him down the well, and while underground, Stan gets pulled away from the group and is attacked by the flute lady after he kind of, you know, is led away. He's freaking out and mad that they all let it happen, but, you know, of course, they were kind of witnessing what was going on with Mike and Henry because they were all down and couldn't help him because, of course, Henry pulled the rope out, so nobody could go get to Mike to help him out, and that's when Stan kind of wandered away. Bill sees Georgie and follows him into the big open area where he finds Bev floating. He tries to reach her, but he can't. He's just a little bit too short, and he decides to follow the fake Georgie, which, you know, we all know is the fake Georgie, because Georgie can't be alive after getting his arm ripped off. He decides to follow the fake Georgie rather than help her. The rest of the losers show up, and they're able to pull her down. They're trying to wake her up. Ben hugs her and then kisses her, and she wakes up, and when he kisses her, everyone's like, oh, Jesus, like, okay. She recites part of the poem, and he finishes it back. They hug, and then they all see Bill staring at Georgie. Georgie asks Bill what took him so long. He's like, I just want to go home. He only has one arm, but he has the boat in his other hand. Georgie calls the boat it rather than giving it feminine pronouns, which Bill told him in the beginning. Georgie says that he wants to come home, and Bill starts crying and says that he wants that more than anything. They say, I love you, and then Bill shoots Georgie in the head with the bolt gun. Georgie starts convulsing on the ground and then turns into Pennywise, because we all knew that, you know, it wasn't actually Georgie. Bill goes to shoot Pennywise again, and all the kids are like, yeah, shoot him, like, get him again. But when Mike was in the fight with Henry, he lost all the rest of the ammo for the gun, so there was only that one shot in it. And so Mike's just kind of shaking his head in the background. He's like, it's not loaded. It's not loaded. Like, it's not going to do anything. So when Bill pulls the trigger, nothing really happens. The losers all try to attack it, but he's winning. He's, like, throwing these kids around like they're a sack of flour. Pennywise ends up getting a hold of Bill and offers the rest of them a long and happy life if they just leave him. He's like, you guys go, and I'll, leave him with me, and then you guys can go live happy lives, and everything's gonna be fine, and it's all gonna be good. Or, if not, I'll feast on your flesh as I feed on your fear, which is one of my favorite, lines, because it just sounds, it's so smooth and crisp. It's great. Bill says that it's fine if they leave him, and Richie gets up and acts like he's going to sacrifice Bill. He's like, this is all your fault. I told you this was going to happen. You punched me in the face, you made me walk through shitty water, you brought me to a fucking crackhead house, and now I'm going to have to kill this fucking clown. And he picks up this pipe, and as he says, I'm going to have to kill this fucking clown, Pennywise gets pissed and, runs at Richie. And Richie goes, "Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole," and smacks Pennywise right in the head with it. It tries to shapeshift and attack each kid to scare them, but since it's only scaring one at a time, the rest of the group can kind of beat up on Pennywise while he's in that shapeshifting thing, so it really doesn't help him at all. They take their turns hitting him, and he makes a big mistake turning into Bev's dad. Like, she already hit him, so she had no problem taking this stick that she found and driving it into Pennywise's throat. He retreats into this hole in the ground, injured and scared. The kids in the cavern start floating down, and Bill finds Georgie's raincoat in a pile of the belongings. They all surround him while he cries and hug him. Now we see that it's September, and the kids are by the river. Bev tells them about being in the lights. She says that she saw them all older and back in that place, feeling really scared. Bill picks up a piece of glass and swears that if it isn't dead, if it ever comes back, we come back too. They all promise with a blood oath to seal the deal. After that, they slowly leave. Stan is the first to go. He tells Bill that he hates him, and then he laughs. And then Eddie leaves, then Richie, then Mike. Ben goes next, and then Bill and Bev are talking about how she's going to live with her aunt, probably forever. They share a little moment, and then she goes to leave, and he runs after her, and they kiss. She says bye, and that is the end of It Chapter 1. Okay, so I know this was a super long episode. I'm sure next week will be equally as long. This is a highly watched film in my rotation, and I remember waiting 2 years for this to come out after it was officially announced. I was so excited because I'm a big fan of the miniseries, which I will be doing on the podcast. I already have it scheduled. It's going to be a little ways from now, but I do have it scheduled to do on the podcast. So no worries if you're a fan of the original. Seth Green as Richie, one of my faves. Absolutely love it. Again, I'm going to be doing part 2 next week, so it's probably going to be equally as long. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, you can follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast and leave us a rating. Whatever floats your boat, just don't lose your boat in the sewer, otherwise you'll get eaten by a clown. Again, if you want to follow us on socials, we are on Instagram and Twitter under M Murder Movies, so that's M as in massacre, Murder Movies on Instagram and Twitter. I hope you have a great week or weekend whenever you're listening to this, and remember to stay safe and stay spooky.